I am super lucky to have Rob Randell join me today. Rob has been in the cybersecurity space for a long time. And I want to touch on a couple of different things about kind of how Rob and I got together. And, Rob and I met first in 2012, if you can imagine that. And Rob was with VMware at the time, assuming a really cool security leadership role there. And when I say that, he was essentially the first principal security specialist, and I'll have him talk a little bit more about that journey at VMware. And Rob and I met because I was with Trend Micro at the time, and Trend Micro was doing some really interesting things with VMware to embed security into the hypervisor and kind of change the way people managed antivirus and things of that nature. And the relationship was really strong. So Rob and I go way back, and he's probably, I always like to say, he's probably forgotten more about cybersecurity than I may ever know with regard to virtualization, hypervisor, certainly cloud now. So Rob, welcome. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I want to give the folks a chance to hear a little bit about your background, your journey, because I do think it's really unique for somebody that was embedded in what was an infrastructure kind of world that decided to really embed security into that. And then I think your career has just taken off since then. So take a few moments to talk a little bit about your background and why you decided to kind of jump into cybersecurity.
Yeah. So, interestingly, you mentioned being at these infrastructure companies and really focusing on security in these infrastructure companies. The way that kind of happened is I do have a background in some security startups over the years. So if everybody remembers Vericept, Webroot, the Determina, I hit a number of those. Back in 2007, and it seems like forever ago, but back in 2007, VMware acquired my company, Determina. And we had a really pretty cool technology. But the cool thing about it for me was, the acquisition was great and all of that. And unfortunately, didn't make much money out of it, but that's okay. But what it gave me was an opportunity, and a huge opportunity to bring security into an infrastructure company such as VMware. At the time, VMware was starting its field specialist practice, and specialists for things like VDI, specialists for things like security. So with me coming in as with the background in security, the VP of SEs at the time was like, look, we want you to kind of take this on and go out and talk to our customers about the security of the hypervisor, right? And understanding why it's okay to virtualize, why it's okay to put two different workloads of different security levels on the same physical hardware. How do you deploy it securely and all those things? And then we started getting into things like leveraging the hypervisor to provide security. And that was pretty cool, right? So that's when we came out with, initially, I think we called it vShield, and then it became vCloud Network and Security. And then eventually we made the acquisition of Nicira, which then became ultimately NSX, and really helped us take off in that virtualization security space. So it was quite the journey at VMware, great time. I really enjoyed that time. From there, decided to make a move over to ServiceNow, where a bunch of my former colleagues were actually at the time, and got to really dive into this space of security operations. So think of security incident response, think of vulnerability management, those types of operational type of aspects of security that we don't always think of very much when we're thinking about security. What I found is typically you see, we go, when you talk security, most people think first of prevention solutions and then detection solutions, but they very often kind of miss out on the response piece of it, right? They don't think too much about that. And that's an integral part of security, right? Because you can have all the great detection and all the great prevention solutions that you want, but if you can't actually respond when one of those solutions fails, and at the end of the day, you're always, there's always ways in, right? And attackers are going to find their way in. How do you respond to that, and how do you quickly mitigate the risk?
Yeah, that's a really key point. As we talk with a lot of customers, the acronym MTTR, right? Mean time to respond, and you get into mean time to detect and all that as well. The response piece is key, because ultimately dwell time continues through when you detect, because they're
Yes.
still dwelling, but it's until you respond and get them out of the environment and eradicate them out is the real key to be able to jump on and get them out of the environment. I want to hit on a couple of key things that I think are relevant for our talk today. Number one, you brought up NSX and network virtualization. And the other part of where our relationship basically continued on is when I was then at Optiv. When you were at ServiceNow, we were looking at ways to kind of collaborate in the cloud and figure out how we could, really improve the partnership. But even then, the NSX piece from microsegmentation, I mean, I was very fascinated at both of what ServiceNow was doing in the automation, orchestration, and tying all the glue together around security operations. That was key for me as a cloud leader. But the other piece from a hybrid cloud perspective that was so important, because we all know, I mean, it's even, consistent with today, people weren't just going to jump into the cloud with both feet. They were going to run hybrid cloud, multi-cloud strategies. And what I loved about what VMware was doing at the time that was so innovative and then still is doing is that network segmentation, which is the epitome and the foundational components of zero trust. And we talk a lot about zero trust on our show and at Remediant. Tell me and the listeners, what did that mean from a network segmentation perspective on how you could improve the defense in depth capability and the mitigation or the prevention of attacks and lateral movement with that network segmentation?
Sure. So I think the beauty of it, initially was, number one, we everything got moved into software, right? It wasn't hardware based anymore. So you didn't have to think about the network in terms of, my routers and my switches, and then X network segment, Y network segment. By moving into software and everything running in the hypervisor and providing that, the virtual firewalling, for lack of a better term, at the virtual NIC, essentially, we were able to then get more logical when we started creating our zones, if you will, or our segments. So when we talk microsegmentation, in theory, yeah, you can go down to an individual VM or even an individual virtual NIC card on a VM and block traffic at that level and create policy at that level. Now you could have always done that with things like host-based type solutions, agent-based type solutions. You put those on the endpoint, and then you try to do that. The challenge with that is you have to do that on a one-by-one basis, right? You may have a central console that kind of does some things, but you have to make sure the agent's there. You've got to make sure that it's there. But with the hypervisor, it's just built in. So by doing that, we were able to get very logical, right? And say, these are my web servers, as an example, for X application, right? So this is my application. I've got 5 servers maybe that makes up that application, right? And these are my web servers for that application. These are my app servers, and this is my database server, right? And then we can go back, and then we can be very granular and say, for this application, you can have unrestricted conversation between the systems. Although from my front end web servers, the only way I'm going to be able to talk to my app server, as an example, is through whatever port that you wanted to choose, right? And be very specific about that. And but you can do that, again, not in the aspect of, hey, they have to be in this specific subnet on the network, and then route, and then you have a firewall in between, and those types of things. You can create these virtual DMZs at any level of granularity that you wanted. That was the real exciting thing about it. And again, I haven't been keeping up with my buddies at VMware, but everything I'm hearing, where I do hear about it, it's still very very relevant. And then you see companies like a Palo Alto Networks really digging in on that and living that. You see other firewall type companies realizing that it's not just hardware based anymore, but you got to get to the software, you got to be in the cloud, and be able to be that and have that level of granularity to provide that level of zero trust.
Yeah, that's a great point on the Palo Alto side and other integrations, right? What's so exciting to me, and we're working on a lot of integrations currently at Remediant right now, is you've got to have that better together story. Like, you can't do it all on your own. And what I love about what I've seen evolve in the last 10 years, certainly with hybrid cloud to cloud, is these security vendors are getting better at putting the glue together and doing integrations. And I think that's key, because everybody, I think when I was at Optiv, they said your typical large company had over 80 plus security tools in
Oh
their
yeah.
stack, and I'm sure
Hmm.
that's grown now if you think about it. So the integration piece, I'm glad you brought that up about VMware. That's key.
Yeah.
Let's move a little bit to kind of where you've evolved and really, I think, a really interesting career around security operations and in your days at ServiceNow. The SOAR phenomenon, right? So security, orchestration, automation, and response. So let's dive in a little bit more on the response side. We've seen a lot of vendors get acquired in that space. I think it's been highly acquisitive because there's been some really good technologies in there that have been gobbled up by some of the larger players. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how you've seen that space evolve. Where do you think we still have a way to go in SOAR, and where would you recommend customers to start thinking about whether they've been in that journey for a while and they're trying to mature it, or they're just kind of embarking on that journey?
Sure. So, and again, it's definitely challenging, but there is a kind of a maturity level that you have to go through, right? Or a maturity journey that you have to go through in that space. And I'll kind of go back to long time ago, right? And when you talk about the automation piece of it, right? Security folks tend to be a little bit loath, for lack of a better term, to automate right off the bat, right? It's been a challenge, right? We went from the days of IDS, if you remember back then, to the concept of IPS. And unfortunately, that didn't do so well, right? Because of false positives, because of issues with detections, you ended up, creating a bunch of these, essentially self-inflicted denial of service attacks. So, the older security folks like myself remember those days
Yeah.
and lived that, and it was a challenge. But as things have evolved, as our confidence levels gone up in our detection solutions and our monitoring, not to mention the ability to bring a number of different solutions together versus just relying on one, that's really kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about the integrations piece of it. Back in the day, there weren't the APIs to do those integrations, to connect and to automate a lot of these things. Now you've got pretty much every vendor out there has got API, accessible solutions, right? There's almost nothing you can't do via the API, and that's really key. As far as the evolution for customers, typically, what we would tell them is, look, start out small, right? Start out, create some workflows, right? Figure out the what your current playbooks are when you're doing a response, and let's put that into an automated workflow. But it doesn't mean that every layer of that workflow has to be automated. Maybe you just start with, when you initially detect something and you get an alert, you take that alert, you create a security incident out of that, and that's the extent of your initial automation, right? And then from there you take it manually. But then the next step is, well, you know what? I know my next step is to go out to my endpoint and to pull all the running processes and to pull all the open network connections, and to see what's running on that system, right? To look for those indicators of compromise. No reason now why you can't make an API call and then go ahead and automate that piece of it. And all of this is very low risk because you're not remediating yet, right? You're not shutting down access. You're not rebooting a machine. You're not re-imaging a machine or anything like that. But as you get better and better at this, and as you get greater confidence, then you can start doing that and make a call out to, like a remediate, as an example, right? And say, you know what, this user, we need to cut off access, right? We need to cut off admin access to this system, right? And we'll go ahead and make a call to remediate. Or, hey, this is my security responder. They need root access into this specific system so they can continue their investigation, and have it automatically go through the approval process. And really, just once it's approved, it automatically opens up that access, gives that admin, the security analyst, the credentials they need so they can go in and do the analysis that they need, those types of things. So you can get more and more and further down the road without ever actually doing anything invasive or, again, potentially causing yourself a denial of service. You can still have people in that process and make sure you get the proper approvals as you go through, so you don't shoot yourself in the foot,
Yeah.
for lack of a better
Oh,
term.
that is excellent insight. I appreciate you sharing that. The thing that just read recently, you said DDoS, and yes, I've felt that for sure back in the day in operations. But the other theme that we talk a little bit about that's not going to go away. In fact, I think we're going to see more destructive attacks with ransomware. It's certainly everywhere. But now what's coming with these packages as they kind of iterate, just like software developers are iterating on software, they're iterating on their capabilities, right? They so they're building in DDoS capabilities into the ransomware as another way to force your hand to pay.
Wow.
Yeah, I just saw that today, that that's a new capability they're starting to build in there. So the DDoS trigger is, I get the heebie-jeebies when you talk about that.
Oh yeah.
Including like a Christmas Day DDoS that I had to deal with way back in the day.
Oh gosh, I can't
I'll
even
never
imagine
forget
that.
about that one. Yeah.
I'm sure your family won't forget about it either.
Oh yeah, it was the typical. We tried to do a Christmas Day movie back when we could go to movies, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, all that stuff was coming down during. I was in and out of the movie theater because we were trying to figure out what. At any rate, the joys of being in operations, right?
Yep. I don't miss it.
No. So I know our time is precious here, and I appreciate you chatting a little bit. I'd like to close to talk a little bit more. We are talking about incident response, and we whether it's ransomware or other types of incidents, we work a lot with customers around at the core of a credential being kind of the culprit in most IR incidents. It's going to be used because of the access and the lateral movement, and therefore the need for network segmentation and identity centric segmentation. What if you could talk to the folks about IR? What are some of your kind of lessons learned around that maturity level? Where do they start? I mean, it can be so daunting, but we try to just, back in your service nowadays, it starts with knowing what you have, right? Knowing what assets you have to even determine, the response to those. And then, we follow that up with, you got to know where your identities are. Because if you don't know where your identities are, you're really in trouble. So give us a couple of takeaways on IR and some guidance for folks if they're struggling a little bit there.
Sure. And again, I think you nailed it. And if you look at all the different frameworks that are out there, right? The number one thing and when I talk like the CIS benchmarks and the STIGs and all those types of things, you look at them. One of the first things they say is know what you're protecting, right? Know your inventory. If you don't know that, and you don't have a good idea of what you're protecting, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So that's kind of a first step, is start to build out that, at ServiceNow, we called it the CMDB, right? The configuration management database. So build that out and grow that and maintain it, right? And one thing we will say is, don't look at building out your CMDB as a one-time project. It is an ongoing process that you're going to need to keep to maintain it, right? It's not a one-time thing that you go out, you discover all your systems, and then you're done. No, you're continually updating it, managing it, and living with that. But once you have that, and again, you don't even necessarily need to start there, but at least you have to have some of your critical assets kind of built out. Once you've got that figured out, and your identities, right, and understand who are the folks that in my environment, who are the folks that need access to certain systems, why do they need access, those types of things. So figure that out. But then you're going to want to go ahead and, again, build out kind of those base run books that you've got, right? You've got playbooks, and most organizations that, at some level should have playbooks to, this is how I'm going to respond to an event. Typically they're written down in a binder, right? Yeah. But the first step is, let's get it out. Let's kind of build the basic workflow. Every step in that workflow could be manual, but it'll take you from step A to step B to step C to step D. And work you through that. Then you go each step and look at which ones you can go ahead and automate, right? Which are the ones that are going to be the biggest bang for my buck, right? Which are the lowest risk ones as well, right? But what are the things that I'm doing 20 times a day or 50 times a day or 100 times a day that I can have the machine do for me? So that's kind of the how you kind of go into that and mature.
That's great advice. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody. I'll wrap up with that concept of response, and it really is pertinent to what I hear more and more CISOs arming themselves with, which is good, and that's cyber insurance. And don't feel like that is the parachute that's going to save you. It's an important part of your security program, but to everything we've been kind of talking about with response is, cyber insurance companies are going to become, with all the ransomware cases that they're writing and that they're paying out, they're going to become much more diligent in working with the customer and the client in the underwriting process to understand at a deeper level what's their response plan, right?
Oh,
Is
they have to.
everything automated? Do they have the proper controls? Because they're not going to take you know 100% word for it that that client's doing everything that they say they're doing. They want to have a little bit more due diligence on that, so everybody wins, right? So the customer's more protected, that the cyber insurance company doesn't write policies that are just bad policies and they're going to have to pay out for bad security practices. But they are really diligent around an incident response plan and how much you automate that, how much you have controls that are constantly being assessed and evaluated. And in a very simple level, whether it's the CIS, top 20 controls or the NIST cybersecurity framework, they're very focused on those.
Well, they're your new auditor, right? Your insurance companies are your new auditors, right? And they're not gonna write a policy for somebody that's not taking the proper precautions, right? It needs to go, really what has to happen. I mean, they're writing the policy for worst case scenario. You still need to put the as much security in place as you can. Just like when you get insurance on your car, right? You put an alarm in your car, it lowers your rates, right? So
yeah, we just don't
that's
have
a
a history of life insurance or car insurance like we have with cyber. That's why
exactly.
we're trying to play catch up. Rob, hey, thanks a million for jumping on the podcast. Always good to catch up with you. I know you got a lot of things
Absolutely.
going on. We'll check back in with you as things develop. But thanks for the time, brother, and appreciate you coming on the show.